Hello, I'm Sue Povell. I'm a storyteller based in Hoylake in England. And today I'm going to tell you a short story, a traditional story, and it's all about us facing our fears. Once there was a city surrounded by high walls with one gate in, and the same gate let you out. One morning the people of that city woke up to find a huge giant right outside their gate. Nobody could go out, and more importantly perhaps, nobody could come in. Everybody was terrified. What were they going to do? Well, the king, he thought to himself, it's my job. It's my job to go and see what this giant wants. So even though he was as terrified as everybody else, he slipped out of the gate and he stood there and he looked up at the giant and he looked down again. He took a deep breath, but to be honest, he was so frightened the breath didn't go any further than the top of his lungs. And he took a step forward. Well, the giant went mad. He roared at the king, and the king was enveloped in a smell of sick and vinegar. Oh. And the giant took his club and he bashed it on the ground, and he bashed it so hard the ground shook for miles around. And the king, well, his shoulders went right up to his ears. And his heart started to race, and his knees knocked together very, very loudly because his legs were trembling like anything. But he took a breath in, although only really at the top of his lungs because he was so frightened, and he took another step forward. Well, the giant roared even more loudly this time. He roared so loudly all the animals fled to find somewhere to hide. And he bashed his club on the ground so hard all the birds flew up out of the trees and fled. And the king, well, his shoulders were still up by his ears, and his heart was still racing, and his legs were still shaking, and his knees were still knocking together. But he took another step forward. Oh, the giant went ballistic. He roared and he shouted and he bashed his club on the ground, and the king's shoulders were so tight and his heart was racing so fast he thought he was going to faint, and I'm sure he was playing almost a drum solo with his knees. They were knocking together so badly. But he took another step forward, and another, and another, and each time the giant went mad. But the king, even though he was really frightened, he kept going. And then he noticed something very peculiar. Then he noticed that the giant, who he thought would get bigger and bigger, was actually getting smaller and smaller. So now he was curious, and in his curiosity his shoulders relaxed a little bit, his heart slowed down, and his knees stopped knocking, although his legs were still trembling a little. And he took another step forward, and another, and the giant got smaller and smaller again. And another, and another, and another, and the giant became really quite tiny. So that by the time the king reached the giant, he was no bigger than the king's little finger. The king laughed. He bent down and he scooped up the giant, and he held him in his hand. Who are you? He said to the giant. The giant, well, he shrugged. Said, well, my name, he said, my name is Fear